Myself. My name is Lottie Joel, and I have come to you from Bodie. The first thing I'd like to express to you this evening is thank you for inviting me to your social. I don't get invited to too many places, you know, and the opportunity to come here to Minden is very rare indeed. And another thing I'd like to comment on is the conditions of the roads. My goodness, what an improvement. The last time I was through these parts, I was on the stage from Carson City to Bodie. It took us nearly 4 days to get there. I'm happy to report that I left Bodie just yesterday morning, and I arrived in this spot late this afternoon. Now that is quite an improvement, don't you think? Of course, last night we stayed with Mary Hoy at the Hoy Mansion in Wellington. Certainly some of you must know Mary. She's a lovely person, still has the best apple pie around. I'm sorry, and here I go, babbling on such nonsense, and you're here to learn about Bodie. I'm not sure that I'm the best person to tell you about the town, but I'll give it my best shot. So I've done a little studying before I got here, and I just read recently it is now the second largest city in California. Nearly 10,000 people call it home. It's no surprise. Traffic is horrendous there. You have to be very careful crossing Main Street or you'll get run over. And let's see, it's a mining town, of course. They're mining silver and gold. They say the veins will never end. The shafts are 1,200 feet deep and still going deeper. There's mills, 9 stamp mills. I don't know if you know what a stamp mill is, but that's where they crush the rock. And they're using, something they call mercury. There might be something wrong with mercury, but oh well. Yes, and another thing I've read that I thought was rather interesting is that there's 450 business established in Bodie, and 70 of them are saloons. Of course, I'm a bit embarrassed to say there's only 2 churches in Bodie, but I suppose maybe they'll improve on that. They say that Bodie is destined to become 3 times the size of Virginia City. Time will tell. But yes, I have a grand idea. Should any of you want to come and visit Bodie, please look me up. Don't hesitate. I will be happy to show you around town. And should you come on a Saturday, we could catch a ball game. The Bodie Mutts are having a heck of a season. It's, of course, the professional baseball team that they have. And in the evening on Saturdays, there's always a dance. There's always some committee throwing some, raising funds for something. Of course, I probably won't be going to those, but you would be welcome. And on Sundays, we could catch the horse races. There's a track there, and they've just completed the covered stands. It's a wonderful place. And ladies, of course, you'll be happy to know that the roller rink is working fine order, and we get to skate for free. Gentlemen, I'm afraid you have to pay. And the bowling alley, we have a bowling alley as well. Plenty to do, like I said. I remember the first day I arrived there. Yes, it was the summer of 1880. Gosh, I didn't think I'd ever get there on that stage. We were just a few miles out of town when one of those summer thunderstorms raced through. Oh, I'll tell you, those dirty roads turned into wet, muddy slicks. And there we were, getting into town when you're supposed to be so excited, and I was fretting that I was going to soil my new boots. The stage pulled in front of the Boone store, and much to my delight, two strong hands reached in right around my waist and plucked me right out of that stage and onto the dry porch. I thought that was a good omen. And I said to myself right then and there, Lottie, this place is going to change your life. And it has. Yes, well, back then I was looking for work in one of the parlor houses. Yes, I admit, I was once a soiled dove. And some of you might judge me harshly upon that. There are people in my town that do. But what is a divorced woman to do in this day and age? Even if I had the patience to become a cool school teacher, they wouldn't hire a divorced woman. And I will be honest, I cannot sew a stitch. Yes, and I don't have any family here. No family to help me build a boarding house that would be proper. And I had no idea that when I would move out west, that a divorced woman would be so harshly looked down upon, as if we're some kind of threat to marriage. I don't even pretend to understand. So I'm not proud of what I had to do, but please, don't misunderstand me. I was never a common prostitute. I was employed by one of the most distinguished places in Bodie. Only the wealthy could stay. My business was discreet, selective, and expensive. So yes, I survived. But we don't need to talk about that anymore. That chapter of my life is gone. You see, I am blessed. I am now a married woman. Who would have ever thought that I would meet the love of my life in Bodie? Certainly not I, but I did. And his name is Eli Joel. And Eli and his partner, Charles Donnelly, own and operate one of the most successful businesses there in Bodie. It's a butcher shop, right there on Main Street. And I remember when I first met him, I walked into his shop. I was looking for a leg of lamb. We were having a dinner party that night, and there he was, standing on the other side of the counter, crisp white apron, kind of short, a little round in the middle, a little balding actually, but with the bluest eyes I had ever seen. They literally pierced my heart. He tells me he was smitten right then too. Well, I'll tell you, a few weeks after that, I looked for every excuse I could to go down to the shop. He was a delightful man. We engaged in wonderful conversation, and I will tell you, he was different than most men I'd met. Well, then he started to court me, really court me. The ladies back at the hotel, they were so jealous. And the months that followed, well, how can I say it? We fell in love. And within 2 months, he asked for my hand in marriage. Ladies, especially ladies, between you and I've never loved a man like I love Eli. He's so good to me. He treats me with respect and dignity. So, of course, I said yes. And we were married in a small ceremony, private ceremony, there in Bodie. Now, I get along fine with Charles Donnelly. That's my husband's partner in the business. But his wife, Ann Donnelly, she despises me, and I don't know why. I have done nothing to this woman, yet she refuses to let go of my past. She talks about me every chance she gets, turns people away from me every direction. I understand she is from the East Coast, and she's from money, and, well, she donates time and money to every organization there is in Bodie, and, well, those people listen to her. And it doesn't bother me so much. I can deal with it. But it pains me so to see the hurt in Eli's eyes when we walk into establishments and people are talking. They turn and they stare, but they don't dare look at me in the eye when I walk by. Oh, no. But then their nasty little whispers start, and I know that they're talking about me. Well, my husband, he doesn't deserve it, and I don't think he can ever get used to it. I feel very bad for this. But he has a plan. A plan that could change all of this. You see, 2 weeks from this Saturday night is one of the biggest social events in Bodie. It's the annual Firemen's Masquerade Ball. everyone that is anyone will be attending this ball. And if you can keep a secret, so will I. Eli has this idea that if these people would just spend a few hours with me with no judgments and just get to know who I am, that they will finally see that I am no different than they. Well, Eli has purchased the most exquisite ball gown I have ever seen. It comes from all the way from San Francisco and was just delivered the other day. It's a long white satin gown with beaded pearls and diamonds. I shall wear long lace gloves, a full feather mask, and a crown. He tells me I'll be the most beautiful woman of the evening, and I somewhat doubt that. And Eli will not even attend this ball as to not reveal my identity. Oh, yes. And when midnight comes and everyone removes their masks, they will see that it is me. And at last they will realize that I am no different than they. And they will lower their fears and open their arms and their hearts. And Eli will join, and we will dance amongst our friends into the dawn. I think it's going to work. I'm so excited about it. But please, should you decide to visit Bodie within the next couple weeks, promise me that you won't give away my secret. There are plenty of those who would love to sabotage it, you know. And my invitation is open for any of those who would like to come. I will be happy to show you around town. So please, if you do, remember me and wish me luck. Lottie Joel did attend that gala event. And it is written that she did not sit down all night long, but danced with the highest of society. She laughed, drank champagne, spoke eloquently. The women were curious of who she was. They were a bit jealous, I think. And the men were smitten, trying to sneak a peek of just who she was. And of course, tradition at this event was before the midnight supper was served, they would vote who the most beautiful woman was. And I think that Lottie's heart was pounding in her chest, and she slipped away in a corner. But they wouldn't hear of it. Oh no, you see, they applauded her back into the center of the room. And with all smiling eyes upon her, they couldn't wait to see who she was. She slowly lowered her feather mask, and the room fell silent. Two men quickly rushed to her side and whispered unkind words to her ear. She slowly turned, but with her head held high, she walked out of the building. Eli witnessed the last few moments from the doorway, and with tears running down his face, he walked his wife home. After that, she was done. She didn't care anymore what these people thought of her, and Eli would not ever think of asking her again. It was sometime after this that Lottie Joel became sick. Nothing serious. A doctor came to her house, and a prescription was filled. Within 24 hours, Lottie Joel was dead. The wicked rumor raced through town. Lottie Joel committed suicide, like so many of her kind. Eli Joel knew different. An investigation revealed that the prescription was filled improperly. The dosage prescribed was lethal. On her death certificate, it is signed accidental poisoning. Was it? We don't know. And poor Eli was faced with a horrible dilemma. Because of her tainted past, there were those in town who felt she should be buried in the outcast cemetery, not in sacred ground. Could you imagine the emotion that this man must have held? This was the love of his life. He begged and pleaded like a child, and they relented. As long as she's buried in the furthest cemetery next to the fence, it would be allowed. And you'll find her there today. And it's easy to find Lottie Joel's grave because Eli purchased the most exquisite wrought iron that money could buy And I'm sure that in his day, there was a beautiful monument to honor his love. But her story does not end there. For Eli remained in Bodie for 7 more years. And every Memorial Day, he would put a canopy over her grave, a wooden canopy, and decorate it with red, white, and blue bunting. And he would sit there all day in the shade of the canopy with her picture. And as the people of the town would go pay respects to their own, they couldn't help but stop and talk to Eli. And there he would sit and tell of all the wonderful things that Lottie had done in her life, all the things that those people never took the time to find out. And they listened. As history comes down through the pages of time, it is said that the people of Bodie had a change of heart. Oh, a little too late, I think. But they realized that maybe Lottie Joel wasn't a bad person. Maybe she was just a woman who was trying to survive the harshness of the West. And maybe they did treat her too harshly that night. Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday was the anniversary of Lottie Joel's death. 108 years ago. She died November 7th, 1899. Now, with compassion and love, we are still talking about Lottie Joel. Thank you. Allow me to introduce myself, for real. My name is Terri Geissinger, and I live in Smith Valley. I know many of you are my friends. I am a historian, a Chautauquan, a guide. I've worked at Bodie for the last 7 years, and I've done a lot of work for historical societies in Mono County especially, and in Inyo County I'm starting to get into, and Douglas County I guess now too. I don't, since you're a historical society, I certainly don't have to say the importance of preserving our history, and we have so much here. It's incredible. And I am an advocate, certainly, for preserving our local history. One thing I do for Bodie that I'm very proud of is I lead the Bodie Resident Research Project, and I am interviewing and collecting oral histories from folks who used to live in Bodie. And in the areas as well, because we all know that we're connected. All these valleys are connected in one way or another. But the oral histories will be transcribed, and then my dream is that someday will be, of course, published and be available for the public to be able to add to, or to read and learn more about. And then also one thing that I'm a big advocate for is getting into our schools. You know, history is something that they don't have to teach anymore. And really, I hate to say this, but I have teenagers. The way they teach history can be rather boring. And we all know that history can be exciting. And if you can bring it alive, that is something that's a really powerful tool in education. So I know that in Carson they're doing some Chautauquas and getting the children involved with that, and it's really giving them a whole new way of looking at history, and I think it's really important.
You know, Bodie had some unusual, I'm going to assume that most of you have been to Bodie. I know some of you have lived at Bodie, and there is a couple things that I think is rather impressive. Bodie, where it's located at 8,375 feet above elevation, there are no trees there. And yet, during the heyday of Bodie, they were burning over 300 cores of wood a day. A day. There are 4 roads that lead in and out of there, and there's a reason why. Because those roads were heavily trafficked with the teams coming in with all the wood. And by 1881, actually 1880, they started getting more concerned that they were going to run out of the wood before the gold. So they invested $500,000 and built a railroad. And the railroad was a wood train, and it's located on top of that bluff, and it runs 32 miles to Mono Mills, where this company owned a huge wood mill that employed 200 men cutting wood every day to supply Bodie and Masonic, if you're familiar with this area. Masonic, Aurora. Aurora was done by then, of course, but later on, there was some. They were redoing some of the tailings with cyanide. Bodie was also, as I said, they worked the process with mercury, which was about 68% effective. But what they did is they introduced cyanide in Bodie in 1898. It was one of the first places in the West to do it, and it was 99% successful. They built 5 cyanide plants in Bodie and reworked over 500,000 tons of tailings. That is why Bodie is still there, because they were doing that in the 30s and 40s. And so the people that I interview are the children that lived in Bodie while their fathers were working for that process. The average age now of a Bodieite is about 85 years old. And there's a few that are in their 90s. And I don't know if any of you know Alice Dolan. She's a very good friend of mine. She taught school there in the 30s. And we had a reunion about 3 years ago, and some of her students came to the reunion with her. I mean, you talk about powerful stuff, and I know you were there. They're a Bodieite family, very good too. So, but in any case, Bodie's a fascinating place.
Where was the lumber mill? In what town?
At Mono Mills on Highway 120.
Oh, okay.
And it's about, was it 8 miles? But how many miles is that there?
What?
The Mono Mills.
From
About
395?
395. Is it 8?
Yeah, it's 7.5, yeah.
Yeah, 7.5 miles off of 395.
To the east.
To the east. They're on the road going to Benton.
Okay.
On the road going to Benton.
That's the
The information center will be done by summer.
Okay, yes. And they're from the Friends of Bodie Railway Company. And they have a kiosk there with information. So they've been working hard on that, I know.
That's that road, as you leave Bodie going back toward Bridgeport, there's a road that turns more to the south.
Yes, and that's Cottonwood Canyon. And that's all dirt road. It's a great drive. And that was originally the Bodie-Lundy Road. It's a toll road. All the roads in and out of Bodie were toll roads. You paid to come, and you paid to leave. And that is the truth. And everything that came on that road, if you were just a horseback, you paid on that road. And so there were a lot of other routes that came in, but those wagons had no choice. And for the Lundy, of course, Lundy sprang up in the 1879, 1880, and a lot of the families that were in Bodie that were running businesses owned and operated businesses in Lundy as well. I mean, that's right next door. Back in those days, that was literally right next door. So
That
they
would be a
were,
horrific climb
yes, and it is a horrific climb, and
with a team.
yeah, with a team. And the nearest railhead for Bodie was actually in Hawthorne. It's actually called Thorne back then. And that was 32 miles downhill from Bodie. And something that we may not think about these days is that if you were a teamster, you were a very respected man, I'll tell you that. But in the wintertime, nothing ceased in Bodie. Everything operated as usual, kind of. The animals had snowshoes. We have them in the museum. If you're a teamster and you're going to pick up a load from Hawthorne, Hawthorne, of course, is in the desert. There is usually very little snow there, if any. So once they got to the point where the snow line stopped, they would have to transfer their loads either back to a wagon to get the stuff and come back and transfer that load to the sleds to bring it up. And I'm assuming, too, that, and I may not be telling you any new news, but I'm going to tell you anyway, I'll be home with bells on. You know that saying, I'll be home with bells on? That comes from those days. Because those teamsters, of course, they're very proud men, as they should be. And they would usually have handmade silver bells on their team. Now, those bells were beautiful, ornate, and played a tune, depending on how big they were. And they had a couple reasons for them. For one, you could hear those bells over the sounds of the animals, because they were a very distinct sound. If you were coming around a corner and you heard bells, you knew another team was coming. So you pulled over where you were allowed to, I guess you'd say. Another thing, if the bells changed tune while that driver was drifting off to sleep, he would know that his animals are picking up pace or slowing down. It also kept those animals in pace with that tune. Yes, and Should you get stuck in the snow or the mud out there, and another teamster had to pull over and help you pull out, you forfeited your bells. I'll be helping bells on. So, yes, no problem on the road.
Share some about the electricity.
Okay, electricity. Bodie can boast a rather big boast. The Standards Consolidated Company was the richest company in town. And they were on the north end of the bluff, which was, interestingly enough, primarily gold, while the south end of the bluff was primarily silver. At those times, the gold was $20 an ounce. These guys were making a lot of money. And because of the wood consumption and the investment that they've already put in, they were starting to look for an alternative methods to power the stamp mill. Thomas Leggett, in 1892, Thomas Leggett was the superintendent of the Standard Stamp Mill. And he had an idea. Gosh, maybe they could build a hydroelectric plant at Green Creek, which is 13 miles away, and they could stretch a long-distance wire through the mountains, over the hills, and it would power the mill. They named it Leggett's Folly, because they didn't think it was going to work. But Thomas kept asking and he had his theory. He was an educated man. He had studied electricity. Edison was already working on direct current. And so this would be alternating current. And could it happen? Well, the stockholders of the mine backed him. And he took no chances. The weight of the world was on this man's shoulders. When it was time to run that wire through the mountains, it took no curves. It went straight up and down the hills, but no curves. In fear, electricity would not follow the wire, but jump off. So then they had to shut the mill down, because then they had to bring in all this equipment that might work. And you have to realize a stamp mill making all that racket in town is really like a heartbeat. It is the heartbeat of your town. Bodie depended on mining. It was a mining town. If mining went down, town's gone. So when they shut down the richest company in town, there was a horrible feeling throughout. Who was this man anyway? And just exactly what does he think he's doing? It was November of 1892, and there were 4 men in the mill. And they stood there, and they ran a telephone wire, and a phone call came. "We're ready, sir. Are you?" So they flipped the switch. Sure enough, slowly but surely, the motor started to hum, started to turn, and the belt started to move in that massive mill, and their stamps, one by one, slow at first, started to stamp again, louder and louder. But they say that the roar from the crowd out front was the loudest of all. And it was a success. And Mr. Leggett didn't have to worry about a thing after that. Westinghouse hired him, and he went worldwide setting up hydroelectric plants all over the world. He spent a lot of time in Australia, and it changed history. And so Bodie was the first long-distance electricity, at least for 13 miles. Bodie had it for 13 miles. After that, I'm sure it went wild. But that is when the Canes, if you're familiar with that family, actually owned Bodie. They're the ones that sold it to the state of California. They started purchasing property at the base of the Sierra so they could tap into that natural resource of the water, that they could be able to use that, the hydropower. Another story, if you're familiar with, is the horrible tragedy at Jordan. And that was, Jordan was the second power plant to be built and successful. And it actually powered Candelaria, Aurora, Aurora by then, some of Bodie, but it went out into the desert. And the town of Bodie, yes, because the Green Creek only powered the stamp mill and a couple of the company houses, but Jordan powered Bodie. And on March 11, 1911, actually an avalanche swept down Copper Mountain and killed everybody in that powerhouse, except for one woman, Mrs. Mason. And the only reason why she survived under tons and tons of snow, she was under there for about 72 hours, was because her dog survived. It was a German Shepherd, and that dog was pinned next to her and kept barking. And the rescuers, we have pictures of the rescuers of about 100 men in a line with big poles, trying to find where they were, and sure enough, they got her out alive. Quite a story.
What, the equipment and everything for the mines and all that, where did that come from? I mean, how did it from the Carson area or from down Bridgeport?
Actually, it came from San Francisco. Most of the equipment came from San Francisco and went over trucking and into the Carson, and then was railed in through Hawthorne. And then they had their own foundry. They ended up having a foundry in Bodie. Unfortunately, it blew up in 1880, I think it was. But their equipment was made, their cast iron was made mostly in San Francisco.
So most of the equipment that came from Hawthorne up the hill?
Oh yeah, I came up the back road. That was the main road into Bodie, as well as, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with the area, Sweetwater, you take the Hawthorne cutoff and through 9 Mile, and then up through Aurora, and then the back road. That was the main route into Bodie. And that was the route that the Wells Fargo moved bullion in and out of Bodie 3 days a week during the heyday. That was also the stages, the Carson City stage, and then Lottie would have come in through that way. And then eventually, they also talked about passenger trains. I have a little bit of, I'm starting to get little bits, pieces of history where they would ride the train all the way down to Hawthorne, and then they would come up that way too from a stage that must have been running from that side. During Bodie's heyday, and this is really interesting, there were 6 stages every day, in and out of Bodie every day. That is like unheard of. Mail was delivered in Bodie every day.
And that was going to Hawthorne?
And that was going through Hawthorne, and then also they were pretty much where it tees off now. We could go to Hawthorne or back to Sweetwater. That was the main route there. And that's where they pretty much decided which way they're going. If they're going to Carson City. And Carson City minted for Bodie until 1900. After that, that bullion went all the way to San Francisco. And there's a story about the highwaymen out there robbing the stages. See, Bodie's bullion, back then, the standard size of a bar was about 20 pounds. And it would be gold or silver. Bodie actually had the ability to separate the gold and silver and pour their bars separately, but they didn't do that. They poured a blended bar because it'd be worthless to the highwaymen out there. They didn't want to steal. They wouldn't have the ability to separate it. Not only did they do that, not only did they do that, but they poured their bars nearly 100 pounds each. Too heavy for one to have on one saddlebag. You have to have 2, and that's another man. And how fast can you run? So they were pretty darn smart. But there's a canyon, the Zell Canyon. If you know your history, if you know your geography, you go through Sweetwater, and you're coming right. You go 4 Mile Hill. You're going towards Bodie on Sweetwater, and there's a small canyon. It esses through it. It's called the Zell. And the holdups would always take place in the Zell Canyon. So frequently, they say the horses would automatically stop.
But the B&T, I know the B&T Railroad went to Mason Valley and Hudson. Was it there that early? Do you know?
No, the V&T never came up. They wanted to connect, they were hoping with the Benton. They wanted the railroad, the wood train to connect with Benton, and it only got like 4 miles outside of Benton, but the V&T never got close. And that was the big dream,
But I don't know if that was even there that early.
Yeah, and Hudson in Smith Valley
Yeah.
is the Copper Belt. I don't know if that's considered V&T. No.
Well, I guess they went through to the.
It's the Carson in Colorado.
The Carson, Colorado. Yeah. Yeah. But, yes.
What's the source of the name, Bodie?
Bodie, poor guy. Bodie and Black Taylor were prospecting partners, and they discovered the original claim. Bodie was on the original claim. Black Taylor was a black man, and they discovered the gold. They were going to Monoville, which is just above Mono Lake. That's where they were prospecting. Now, let me back up a little bit. A lot of people come up the roads into Bodie, and they wonder what in the world were they doing out in the middle of nowhere, looking for gold. That's not really what the truth. They weren't in the middle of nowhere. The first discovery of gold on the eastern side of Sierra was Dogtown, at the bottom of the hill. And the second discovery was Monoville, just above Mono Lake. As the bird flies, they're probably maybe 10 miles apart. Bodie and Black Taylor were prospecting partners at Monoville. They got grub staked, and they were simply panning for gold in the creeks behind Monoville. That's where the Bodie Hills now lie. They discover, or they bring out color, and they pack up their little burro, the best stuff they can find, and they hike back to Monoville. It's a 2-day hike for them. They have an assay, the assay's rich. They spread the word, they legally stake the claims, they go back and they start building the cabin. And it's a very crude cabin. It's in the side of a mountain. It's a rock cabin. And you know, they just kept on doing it. And they took a risk, a horrible risk. In November of 1859, geez, they just wanted to go back to the cabin one more time. 2 days, and during that time, a blizzard came in, and you know how fast our storms can come in. Bodie couldn't make it through the storm. He lays down, and he dies. The winter snow covers his body for the entire winter. In the springtime, they find what's left, and he's buried on the spot. Black Taylor, of course, you know, he takes off, and he goes out down to Benton and gets hired by a man to watch over the cows. This man is just now settling into the Benton area. And he gets killed by Indians down there. They massacre him. Not before he kills 10 himself. Quite a story. So both of these men are, they're both dead within 6 months of discovery. But because Bodie was on the original claims, they called it the Bodie Hills. And for 17 years, the prospectors kept looking for the major source of gold that these men had found. For 17 years, they could find enough to keep them interested, but never enough to build a town. In the meantime, Virginia City and Aurora was huge. And that's what kept people in that vicinity to keep looking, because they would supply up in Aurora. So 17 years come and go, most of these guys are gone. Few are left in camp, late afternoon, probably getting ready for supper around the campfire, and they hear a rumble. And they look on the bluff, and a big dust cloud comes out of the main mine. And they're like, oh, so disappointed. After all that work. They go in the next day to assess the damage, and guess what they found? That's how they found it. It was because the face of that rich vein sloughed off, and there it was. The year was actually 1875. It took a couple years for them to prove it, to really get big investors involved. Once Eshington and the guys from New York and San Francisco got involved and invested into Bodie, the boom was on. By 1880, Bodie became the second largest city in California, 10,000 people. And a lot of people died because they weren't expecting to go out there in that desert and have the severe winters that we have. And someone was saying earlier, oh yeah, you do get some snow out there, don't you? Yeah, we have a lot of snow out there. I mean, on a good year, 10 feet, it should be. Last year, nothing. Nothing. We had maybe 2 feet, it melted so quick. I work for the state of California. We have snowcats and snowmobiles. That snowcat sat in the dirt all winter. So that's a statement. That's something scary. 3 years ago when we had a decent winter, Bodie Creek, which really doesn't last very long. If it's a good winter, it may last maybe into August. A couple years ago, there was so much water that we white water rafted it. And this year, nothing. And another little tidbit that's kind of interesting that most people don't know. When Bodie was first starting, they put their cemetery near where the front gate is. It's what we call the kiosk. It's out there in that field in front. And evidently, after about 1880, the water table was a little too high, and those coffins started kind of popping up. So that's when they moved, and it's written in the papers. They probably didn't get them all. But they moved most of them up on the hill. And of course, that's now where the cemetery is located. So when the year where I just talked about that water rafted, sure enough, there was a lake out where that old cemetery was. And we have pictures of the Rangers canoeing out there. So, yeah, so that's all very true.
The tailings were down southeast from Bodie?
Actually, when you look at the old historic photographs, the tailings were all in front of the stamp mills. They were all in front of the stamp mills. The standard is really the largest mine there. The tailings were almost so high you could barely see the mill over the tailings. And then there was another large mill around the corner, around the bend, and then there were several dotted along. There were 9 stamp mills in Bodie, which was 180 stamps crushing rock. And they ran 6 days a week, 24 hours around the clock. Very, very noisy. Bodie was not a quiet place. And with 300 cords of wood burning every day, they barely saw blue sky. And I'll tell you what was more troublesome for them when all 9 mills were running was on Sundays, when they shut them down. Because it was too darn quiet. They couldn't get the kids to sleep. They said. They said.
How about the schools?
The school, very good, thank you. The school, this is pretty interesting, and I do a lot of school groups, and I'm always hoping, if they say they're from Los Angeles, I just have to throw it out the window, because it's not going to be nothing to them. But for example, our school in Smith Valley, our kids go to a school from K through 12, it's like 230 kids. In 1879, there were 614 children enrolled in school in Bodie. And it was a 2-story schoolhouse, that's it. 8 teachers were employed. And no divorced women either. But 614 children enrolled, but the average attendance daily was only 135. So these children were working. Because of, and please don't think they were working in the mines, because they probably weren't. Because of the high wages that Bodie Union, the miners' union, were paying the men, starting wage to be a miner in Bodie was $4 a day. That was excellent wages. The miners' union laws were adopted by the Virginia City laws, and so they were very wealthy. These guys were making a lot of money. When you look at the management in it, they were making $8.50 to $10 a day. And you could get 3 hots and a cot. People know what that is here. Kids don't know what that means. They have to guess. They could get that for about $1.25, $1.50 a Bodie. So these guys are making pretty good money. Who do you think is really making the money in Bodie? I kind of like to say it's the whiskey and the women. Because the girls were making a lot of money in Bodie. And they were making in 1 week what a miner was making in a month. And at the beginning, when there was so many more men than women, it was 10 men to 1 woman there. A lot of the prostitutes from Virginia City went to Bodie because of the peaks, that's where the business was. And so we had a lot of the famous women actually did come to Bodie as well. But the schools, we'll go back to that. Prostitutes and schools, sorry. So what was happening is because of these high wages that these men were being paid, the fathers were all working 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. And that left a lot of chores that were for boys only left in town. Delivering wood to your houses, delivering ice. Bodie had ice for your drinks all summer long. Because they had ice houses and they had reservoirs there that they would actually harvest ice. But they were swampers, the kids that helped the big teams come in. You know, if you're a driver and you're making the big bucks, you're not going to come into a town like Bodie and want to take care of your string of animals. You hire the kids, they're the ones that pull the horses or the mules down, whichever you have, and they're the ones that take care of it. They're called swampers. And they were paid very well. So the boys had certainly their chores, tasks, and they were getting paid well. I even have some tidbits of crossing Main Street. Main Street, there was places on Main that was a muddy mess all the time. Well, could you imagine all the animals that were in town and no sewer system? 10,000 people in town, no sewer system. I don't know about you, but I don't want to soil my boots that way. But they would be hired to actually lay planks down and so that the women could cross. And they did. They had all kinds of, they actually, if you go to Bodie, you'll notice the tin cans on the sides of the buildings, keeping the weather out, and on roofs. Kids, that was chores. They would split the cans, flatten them out, and that's what they were doing. Girls, on the other hand, now, that was different. You would train your daughters to sew, to be proper, to teach school, hopefully, and also another way that they earned money was delivering house cats. They would have kittens in baskets. The miners would love to buy kittens because, let's face it, none of us like mice or rats, do we? And so, but little girls could make a lot of money selling their kittens, and that's very common.
When did they stop mining and why did they stop mining?
Okay, Okay. When did they stop mining? Actually, the last mining, hard rock mining, really kind of started to cease after they introduced cyanide in 1895. By then, the shafts were pretty deep, and the deeper they went, the more expensive it got. You see, they ran into water at the 400-foot level. Most of these shafts were average 600 to 800 feet. A couple of them went down to 12. They were pumping that water out constantly. Or the deeper they got, the bigger pumps they needed, the more expensive it got. And wood wasn't exactly available. So, once they perfected the cyanide process, that was a cheaper way for them to process the tailings, and it was a lot more profitable. There was some private, the Bells, Bobby Bell, I know, they were still working on their private claims, and they were able to pick and, out theirs. But the big companies pretty much ceased and just concentrated on cyanide process. The last thing in process was actually in 1948. During the war in 41, Congress passed a law that no more mining for minerals, everything needed to focus towards the war. In 46, they reversed that decision. 47, the Rose Clip mine on top of the bluff started up again, and it burnt down during lunch break. And that was it. That was done. And so, and then the bluff was not owned by the state of California, it was owned by the Kane family. Gee, they were thinking, because when they sold Bodie to the state of California only purchased the gold and the buildings. The bluff where all the mining was, they kept. And when the older ones passed on, the younger ones sold that bluff to a Canadian company called Galactic Resources. And they did, in 1998, or actually in the late 1980s, they took some drill core samples up there and to see how much gold is left in Bodie. Boy, howdy, weren't they happy. They just wanted to do a little open pit mine. No biggie. You won't even know you were there. And that's how Friends of Bodie was born. And it was a support group to get the message out there that, hey, if this goes on, and there's two sides of the coin. A lot of people wanted the mine because it would have, first it would have helped with the economy. But then a lot of people who really enjoyed Bodie thought it would be probably into that town of what we know of it today. So what happened was 10 years of litigation and a mess. The Galactic Resources was working a mine in Summitville, Colorado, and they had a little bit of problem with cyanide leaking into the groundwater. It bankrupted the company. They moved out of the country. We are now all paying for the cleanup. And they actually sold the bluff to the state of California for $5 million, and it was a done deal in 1998. So not very long ago. It added 511 acres to the park. The park now is a little over 1,100 acres altogether. And just to let you know how busy we are in the summertime, average visitation to Bodie State Park is around 200,000 visitors. A lot of you think we're not doing anything up there, huh? But it's amazing. We do get a lot of people. Since 9/11, the visitation's dropped off. All parks, national parks, state parks, everything's dropped off. You would not believe that the visitation that we get from Germans. They're fascinated with the Old West. They love it. And we have German and a lot of French people that come and visit. And it's a lot of fun. And if you guys get any German television, I'm going to be on German TV. They came up the other day.
Then you get a lot of bus tours.
We don't get too many. I don't think they want to drive up that road. We don't get a lot of bus tours. Not as many as we could get.
So the foreign tours coming on their own?
Oh, they're coming on their own. They get into the traveling circuit where they're, they buy the packages and then they tell them, if you're going to travel this loop, what to see in our area. It's usually Death Valley, Yosemite, Bodie, Tahoe, that kind of thing. I once had some tourists that came through and said they were headed to Hawthorne. And I said, do you have family in Hawthorne? And they're going, oh, no, it's where our travel agent is sending us to stay. And I said, well, are you going to Lake Tahoe? And they're going, no, we're going to Hawthorne. I said, have fun. So, yes, ma'am.
Didn't Bodie have a beer brewery?
Oh, yes, you better believe it. 4 breweries. She's a Bodieite. She's a Bodieite. Yep. Yes, 4 breweries at Bodie. Oh my goodness. Okay, let me invest here a little bit. There were 4 breweries in Bodie. They also had 4 fire companies and 4 daily newspapers. And so, it was impressive. With nearly 10,000 people, it depends really on what statistics you're going to follow. You get all kinds of ranges of what the peak was. The Chinese, there was a lot of Chinese in Bodie, but they were not allowed to work in the mines. This was a miners' union town, and they were not going to pay Chinese $4 a day. So Chinese were very important in what they established, which was bringing in the cordwood for burning in your homes, for your heat and your cooking. So they were all through the pinyon forest and bringing in wood that way on burros. They also had fruits and vegetables coming from Sonora. They would actually go to the other side of the mountain and bring them over from Sonora. They had their own society, certainly, and they had their own, they I don't know if any of you watched Deadwood, but actually the historians that worked on this to show Deadwood, Bodie and Deadwood were probably pretty close as far as that main street, that thoroughfare looking like that. They were selling meat and plucked chickens and everything on the corners. That was really close to what Bodie was like. So, but yeah, 4 breweries, about 70 saloons, lots of hotels. You could buy fresh lobster in Bodie.
How about Law and Order?
Law and Order, very good. Law and Order, yes, they had constables, they had night watchmen, they had private police. This would be businesses that would hire people to protect their business for foul play. Now, of course, you had the good side and the bad side of town. With all this, with the red light district, Chinatown, and a lot of the saloons were located on the north end of town. And if they were shooting each other up over there, so be it. But if you came on the higher end of town and you got into, the higher end of society and you were creating problems, that was something different. Also, law was a little bit twisted a little bit differently back then. You see, most men and some women, depending on what kind of women they were, everybody carried a gun. And if you and I stepped out in the street because you insulted me and we were going to have a duel out in the street, this is honor. And if I shot you or you shot me, this was our business. If you got shot because you were standing in the wrong place at the wrong time, that's your bad luck. That's the way it was. That's truly the way it was. But if there was a man shot in the back, that is not acceptable. If you stole somebody's horse, you will hang for it. So yes, they had justice court and they had law. And they also had 601. Yes. 601, Bodie 601, very popular group. They say hundreds of men joined. And if you were creating a lot of problems in Bodie, you were be slipped a note from the 601 and asked you to please leave soon, or you will suffer the consequences. There was an incident in Bodie that 601 was very involved with. It's the one and only hanging in town. There was a dance, and of course this whole thing is over a woman. And actually I've done some pretty heavy research on this, and the husband was not a very nice man. After he fell in the mine shaft and bumped his head, his personality completely changed. And he was not very nice. A lot of abuse was going on there. Well, he was reporting to work up at the Standard Mine, and he warned his wife, who was very involved with the social end of things, that at the dance, don't be dancing with that man, because he's been hanging around here a little bit too close. Well, gossip. Word got back up to the husband, guess what? They're dancing. So he shot back to town, busted into the dance, and asked him to step outside. We need to discuss this. So they did. They walked out of the miners' union home, because that's where all the dances were taking place, and they walked south towards the Shamba, the brick building, and there was a street right there called Low Street. And when they got to that point, DeRoche, which was the man dancing with the wife, shot the husband in the back. And they knew, he knew, better get out of town quick, and he did. And he went down Cottonwood Canyon, they captured him down there and brought him back to jail. Well, it didn't take long for 601 to form, and the jailer, of course, he'd been drinking again. He didn't want to have anything to do with this mob, because they were serious. They wanted him, and they wanted him now. Justice, swift and sure. So he was released. They walked him right back to the scene of the crime, which was in January of 1879. Lots of snow. Blood is still on the snow. They actually moved over a hoist from a wagon hoist. They moved it over to the scene of the crime. And they asked him, "Do you have any last words?"
We're at Sure Heaven filming Lots of Love. Been growing my hair for an extremely long time to donate it to some kid because my girlfriend had cancer as a child, and she wore wigs for a lot of years until I met her and said, don't wear any more wigs. But my beautiful locks of hair, I thought, what the hey, I'll grow my hair and donate it to a kid, like Deborah. And that's what we're doing. Young Terri Moore here has decided to be my instructor on getting rid of this hair and donating it to a young kid. That's perfect.
A major part of it for the Lots of Love. We're going to contribute this hair right here.
Excellent.
Okay, and then I'm just going to cut the beard up and give him a nice clean look.
Terri Moore tells me that I'm one of the, maybe the only male in Douglas County to do Locks of Love. So if you young men have long hair and need at least 10 inches, and decide you want to get your hair cut, go ahead and come down to Sure Heaven and make a donation. And we'll try to get you some PR for doing it. And who knows, maybe we'll get some more people. And Sure Heaven's down here in Gardnerville.
It has to be 10 inches. The hair has to be 10 inches.
And we can see if we can get some more wigs out there for kids who gone through fire or cancer. It's a good cause.
Yes.
And try to set up maybe a yearly thing if that make it easier for people to do it.
783-9113.
And I'll be glad to.
Just reach me on my cell phone.
That works. This is Michael Smith. We have just finished donating my hair to Locks of Love. And Terri Moore says I look like a new person, which I feel lighter. And I certainly hope this can be turned into a wig for a kid and that more people will come and donate their hair as well. This is Michael Smith reporting from Sure Heaven in Gardnerville. Thank you.